The 1969 New Zealand general election took place on November 29, 1969 to elect a total of 84 MPs to the 36th Parliament. Due to rapid population growth, new electorates needed to be created to give Kiwis adequate representation in Parliament. Through an amendment in the Electoral Act in 1965, the number of electorates in the South Island was fixed at 25, an increase of 1 since the 1962 electoral redistribution. The increase to 84 electorates was the first since the 1902 electoral redistribution. Due to the fixed number of South Island electorates, the number of North Island electorates would be increased in every subsequent election. After winning the last election, Prime Minister Keith Holyoake was having a rough old time as his national government struggled to satisfy voter demands in regards to controlling rising inflation and wage constraints. The government would go into panic mode in early 1967 when Labour and political pundits started writing the Nats off following an almost disastrous by-election result. In late February 1967, Minister of Finance Harry Lake would die, causing a by-election in his seat of Fendalton. This Christchurch electorate was considered one of National's safest seats. Eric Holland, son of the late Prime Minister Sid Holland, who was also the former representative of Fendalton, was selected as the candidate. Most expected him a shoo-in. What came next was a political earthquake, as the election night results had a slim majority for the Labour candidate. The shock result prompted Leader of the Opposition, Norm Kirk, to declare that National had lost its mandate to govern. However, after special votes were counted, National did manage to hold the seat by just 286 votes. Holyoake realised his government needed to up their game and satisfy the voters, otherwise they'd be toast in '69. He would appoint Tamaki MP Rob Muldoon as the new Minister of Finance. Muldoon was seen as a non-choice by Holyoake, as the two had both privately and publicly clashed, most notably in 1961 when Muldoon, along with 9 other National MPs, voted with the opposition and removed capital punishment for murder from the crimes bill that the government had introduced. The mild-mannered Holyoake was also not a fan of Muldoon's abrasive debating style. Nevertheless, Muldoon had proved himself as Under-Secretary of Finance after overseeing the successful introduction of the decimalisation of currency that same year. At this time, there was a serious economic crisis due to the downturn in the price of wool. In response to the crisis, Muldoon introduced mini-budgets instead of annual budgets, the first being presented on May 4, 1967. He cut and held public expenditure and increased indirect taxes to reduce demand. As a result, Muldoon was credited with the better economic performance New Zealand enjoyed, raising his profile among the public and being labelled an economic wizard by the press. Apart from the economy, the biggest issue of the day was by far the Vietnam War. The government strongly supported the war. However, by the late 60s, the war was growing more unpopular by the day, as casualty lists mounted with no victory in sight. Norm Kirk and the Labour Party capitalised on this and began to turn large anti-war demonstrations into Labour rallies. National was accused of being out of touch with young Kiwis, so Holyoake would attempt to bridge this gap by lowering the voting age from 21 to 20. A very radical move, eh? As television was now incredibly common, and by 1968 almost every household in the country owned one, television would change the face of political campaigning as more and more political ads would flood the airwaves. Well, on the one channel we had back then at least. One of New Zealand television's biggest moments came in April 1968 with the sinking of the inter-island ferry Wahine, just out of Wellington Harbour during Cyclone Gazelle, the worst ever storm recorded in New Zealand. Speaking of intense storms, the 1969 campaign was notable for its intensity, as both parties fought vigorously for votes in marginal constituencies. Holyoake's National Party relied heavily on its record of stability and economic management. Their slogan, "You're better off with National," emphasised continuity and caution. Holyoake, a seasoned campaigner, sought to project an image of calm and experienced leadership. Norm Kirk brought energy and charisma to Labour's campaign, appealing to a younger generation of voters and those dissatisfied with National's policies. Labour used the slogan "Time for a Change," emphasising a progressive and optimistic vision for New Zealand's future. Norm Kirk and Labour went into this election riding high in the opinion polls. Some accused Labour of being too confident. Industrial relation disputes would make a comeback late in the election, when the captain of the ship MV Wainui got in a dispute with the Seamen's Union. Yes, I can hear you giggling right now. After he refused to accept crew that had been put forward by the union. Prior to this, the captains were allowed to make a selection of who they wished to engage. With the union putting a man forward for engagement, it meant that there was no free selection. Without adequate crew, the ship, full of important cargo, couldn't set sail. The Labour Party strongly backed the Seamen's Union. However, National and most New Zealanders opposed them and felt that being forced to employ someone you didn't want or felt would be unsuitable just wasn't right. There were a lot more meetings involving the union and the government, but nothing was resolved, and the Wainui finally sailed for Singapore after being held up for 141 days. Like in the previous election, on the eve of polling day, the leaders of the major parties would deliver their final pitch to voters in a TV address. This would be the closest we'd get to a TV debate for some time.
In a few hours you will have the opportunity of deciding which political party shall govern New Zealand for the next 3 years. It is a responsibility I know you will exercise with care and deliberation. Though you've had the opportunity to weigh the election programs of the two main political parties, there may be a few lingering doubts in your mind either way.
Good evening. It's a privilege to be able to talk with you again in your home. I hope that every one of you will exercise your right to vote tomorrow. You know, our forefathers gave their lives to win that right for them and for us. And today, hundreds of millions of people live under communist dictatorship and don't have the right of free elections. Wars are being fought and thousands of men are giving their lives to win that right against brutal communist aggression.
And the winner was... In a result that shocked the country, Keith Holyoake and the National Party won an unprecedented fourth term, picking up one seat to hold 45 seats and 45.2% of the vote. Norm Kirk and the Labour Party, despite picking up 4 seats to hold 39 and winning 44.2% of the vote, would be utterly humiliated by the result. Despite the hopes of a reinvigorated Labour Party, Labour was overconfident, started their campaign too late and, crucially, did not win in Auckland. All of Labour's gains came from newly created urban seats, particularly in South Auckland, which saw 2 strongly Labour electorates split into 4 strongly Labour seats to accommodate rapid population growth. Labour MP Warren Freer believed that had it not been for the Seamen's strike during the election period, Labour would have won. Social Credit's leader Vernon Cracknell would lose his seat of Hobson to National's Logan Sloane, leaving the party with no seats in Parliament, as well as seeing a 5.4% drop in the party's vote to be on 9.1%. Keith Holyoake, or Kiwi Keith as the supporters knew him, projected calmness, stability, and had the common touch that made him appealing to many Kiwis. Ever modest, however, he would credit Finance Minister Rob Muldoon for reviving the economy and thus ensuring National's victory.